Agatha learned early how to make small things last. She could press 2 shirts into one, stretch a single meal into 3 small dinners, and fold blankets into mountains that warmed a room. That skill kept her alive in the years after her mother's death and before her own tiny independence arrived. When she was 19, she moved into a cramped room in an old, weathered house on the edge of town. A squat where the rent was a few coins and the rules were vague. She arrived with 1 bag, a bruised heart from a failed promise, and a stubborn belief that tomorrow could be kinder. Her roommate, Moira, had found her through a cousin and, at first, acted like a friend. Moira was flashy in small, sharp ways. She had expensive habits disguised as thrift. She smoked from morning to night, and she loved telling stories about a life Agatha had never led. To Agatha's relief, Moira let her sleep on the lower mattress and handed her half of a stale loaf on bad days. But generosity, Agatha soon learned, can be transactional. Moira gave when it suited her and took when it served her needs. She borrowed small sums and didn't return them. She used Agatha's clothes without asking. She mocked Agatha's cautions. When the two shared a single rickety stove, Moira would cook lavishly for herself and leave Agatha with soup that had been simmered until it was little more than salt and regret. Agatha kept her face soft. She told herself that hardship will teach humility and that patience would pay off. Yet, patience becomes a weight if it is always carried for the sake of someone else's comfort. One night, after a fight sparked by Moira's accusation that Agatha was keeping a visitor's money, Agatha packed her bag. Her hands shook not from fear alone but from the adrenaline of leaving. She walked out into a night lit by distant neon and the murmured traffic of a city not yet asleep. She stopped at the bridge and watched the river take reflections away, like a mirror that refuses a face. That walk became a declaration in disguise. She did not have a plan. She had only a handful of coins and the thought that she could no longer trade her dignity for shelter. She found an empty bench, laid her bag beside her, and let her eyelids close. Somewhere between waking and dreaming, a stray dog pressed close to her, warm and heavy with trust. A street vendor, closing his stall, noticed her and offered biscuits. A woman from a nearby church, who had seen Agatha leave the squat earlier in the evening, came across the bench and wrapped Agatha in a blanket before sunrise. By morning, the city had arranged small kindnesses. A day laborer offered work, a tailor fixed torn hems for free, and a neighbor handed over a pamphlet with a phone number for a women's shelter. Miracles at this stage were small and practical rather than thunderous. Food, shelter, someone who believed she deserved help. Yet, each small intervention pulled her away from the hard edge of despair. They whispered a possibility, that leaving had cracked open a space for good things to find her. Leaving a harmful place is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's a single step taken alone at night. Even the smallest acts of kindness can be the first miracles that steady a shaking heart. The women at the shelter called her Agatha with gentle curiosity, wanting to know the story behind the suitcase and that careful, watchful look in her eyes. They offered clean sheets and loud laughter at the morning table, and asked questions that were more like invitations than interviews. Among them was Neka, a woman with a voice that seemed to hold the map of every hardship she'd survived. Neka told Agatha about a sewing cooperative down the road where they taught women to turn fabric into a living. She explained how the machines were old but steady, how the supply of cloth came from donations, and how the cooperative paid in steady, modest wages. "You learn the stitch, you keep the stitch," Neka said. "And sometimes the stitch keeps you." Agatha took that advice like a lifeline. She practiced threading needles until her fingers cramped, learning to coax truth out of tangled threads. She discovered that the repetitive motion of stitching calmed the furious noise inside her head. The cooperative, a single cramped room filled with sewing machines and women who hummed like a choir of hope, gave her a schedule and a reason to get up. She started as an apprentice sweeping floors and ironing, then moved to hemming, then to pattern work. Each month, small salaries arrived and the pile of unpaid bills retreated a fraction. But miracles were not only about new work. One afternoon, after an exhausted shift, Agatha found an envelope tucked into her locker. A donor had left enough money to buy a modest spool of high-quality thread and a note that read, Use it to make something that matters. No signature. No hint of who had watched her practice until her fingers bled. The mystery donor's gift felt like a warm hand on the back of her neck. Encouragement disguised as generosity. That spool became her lucky charm. She imagined the unseen watcher smiling at her, and it helped when she labored long hours. Yet hardship took its toll. Moira's occasional whispers and the memory of being mocked hung around her like old frost. Sometimes exhaustion turned to panic, and she wondered if the slow climb was just a different shape of the same ladder. To keep herself from sinking into suspicion, she held to small rituals. Tea before bed, checking the locks twice, leaving a note on the mirror reminding herself of the promise she'd made on the bridge. She also learned that miracles require tending. The sewing cooperative didn't strike like lightning. Its miracles arrived through community labor, small investments from strangers, and the many hands who showed up each day. She began saving every spare coin, learning how small placed coins could become a safety net. She took a single commission, a patchwork bag for a market vendor, and when the vendor displayed it, customers asked where it came from. Orders trickled in. The cooperative helped her learn to price her pieces, to photograph them under the right light, and to present her work without apology. An order for 10 bags felt like a thunderclap of possibility. Miracle number 2 arrived unexpectedly. A former student of the cooperative, now running a small boutique, offered to carry Agatha's bags on consignment. The boutique was not glamorous, but it was steady. Each bag sold felt like proof that her hands could birth dignity. Miracles often come as opportunities, doors held open by other people's faith. Hard work turns those moments into durable change. Patience and practice make miracles repeatable. Just when things seemed to be arranging themselves into a manageable pattern, the past found Agatha again in ways she hadn't expected. Moira did not just vanish from her life after Agatha left. Word traveled in small neighborhoods like wind in straw, and Moira had a way of bending stories into weapons. She found Agatha's boutique on a slow afternoon and began whispering to the vendor that the bags were cheap imitations, sewn by someone who stole designs. The vendor, nervous about reputation, temporarily pulled the bags down from the display shelf. Agatha felt the old panic rise, a sharp, familiar pain of being denied the right to breathe. Her hands, which had grown steady with the rhythm of sewing, lost their rhythm for a day. She had to prove herself, not to herself but to strangers who would accept a rumor's weight over the truth. The cooperative rallied around her. Women offered statements about her workmanship, and Neka marched to the boutique to pull the vendor back into conversation. Still, the damage was tangible. A week without sales meant bills went unpaid and the landlord's patience thinned. This was a test, small and cutting. Agatha learned that miracles sometimes show up not to erase difficulty but to steady you while you face it. A kind schoolteacher who frequented the cooperative bought several bags without haggling. A young man offered to sit at a weekend fair and sell for her when her voice failed. Their interventions were quiet, a purchase, a helping hand, but each one reinforced the idea that someone else was on her side. Inside her, something else changed. Where she had once kept silence to avoid trouble, she began to speak out about unfairness. Not angrily, but plainly. When the vendor checked the details of a bag and the quality of the stitching, she answered with facts and invoices, with calm evidence instead of accusations. That steadiness moved people. It was not a miracle that erased harm, but it was a kind of moral miracle. The growth of Agatha's own confidence into something that made rumors foundered on the rocks of truth. At night she would walk home past the river and think of Moira on her patched mattress squatting in a different place. Sometimes she felt pity. Sometimes she felt only the quiet satisfaction of someone who had reclaimed the right to be herself. She learned to accept help without shame and to refuse the idea that receiving was weakness. Each intervention, a stranger's purchase, a friend's display of support, was a stitch sewn into the fabric of her new life. When the past returns to test you, small acts of solidarity become miracles, not because they erase pain, but because they shore up your ability to stand and answer with truth. Spring arrived and, with it, a warmth that seeped into the bones of the neighborhood. The cooperative flourished enough to warrant a small stall at the seasonal market, and Agatha's line of bags began to attract a regular clientele. She discovered that repetition breeds excellence. The 50th bag was better than the 10th, and the 100th nearly perfect. Her life started mapping itself into steady rhythms. The sound of a sewing machine, the hiss of steam from an iron, the murmur of neighborhood gossip rising and settling like weather. Then came one of the stranger miracles. An elderly woman, Mrs. Okoye, with fingers stained from decades of cooking and a laugh that rolled like loose coins, bought one of Agatha's bags and asked if she could see more. Mrs. Okoye ran a small food stall that supplied a private school's teachers. She began to buy bags not for fashion but to gift to young teachers when they were promoted. Her purchases were steady and generous. More than the money, Mrs. Okoye offered Agatha something even rarer: trust. She invited Agatha into her kitchen to learn how the market of food and favors worked, and she introduced her to customers who wanted local goods beside their lunches. This steady support allowed Agatha to save enough for a tiny room of her own. Not a squat, not a bench, but a small place with a window that could open to the street. She painted it a pale blue and placed a single plant on the windowsill. At night she read by the light of a salvaged lamp. She had never imagined that such small comforts could feel like a palace. As her business grew, a visiting charity worker noticed her work at the market and proposed a collaboration. A fundraiser where several cooperatives would display their craft, and a portion of the proceeds would fund training programs. The charity offered a small grant to supply better sewing machines for cooperatives with proven results. Agatha, who had never believed her work would draw attention, found herself writing a simple proposal with NECA, describing how steady jobs could prevent women from returning to harmful situations. When the grant came through, it was a miracle that changed more than one life. New machines meant more production, and more production meant better wages. Women who had been juggling 3 part-time jobs now had a single source of steady income. The cooperative's success rippled outward. One member paid school fees for her niece. Another could finally see a dentist. Another sent money back home. Agatha's role in writing the grant taught her a new skill: that advocacy and storytelling can be instruments of change. Yet not every miracle arrived as smooth gold. A shipment of fabric was delayed, a machine jammed, and one of the older women fell ill. Each setback demanded flexibility. Agatha began buying insurance in the form of relationships. Neighbors who watched stalls when she needed to be absent. Women who could fix machines with patience and oil. A teenager who learned to deliver orders by bicycle. She learned that miracles multiply when you prepare your hands to receive them. Blessings often come through steady allies and small institutions. When communities invest in one another, miracles scale, but they also require work, planning, and the willingness to share success. With a modest room, a steady income, and a reputation slowly forming around her craft, Agatha felt secure in ways she had not in years. But security is not armor. One afternoon, a neighbor ran up with bad news. Moira's life had collapsed further, and she was sleeping at a crossroads near the market. The news tugged at Agatha in complicated ways. Old memories rushed in. The nights of sharing a single blanket, laughter that masked sharpness, accusations that cut like frayed wire. Part of Agatha wanted to turn away and pretend not to care. Another part remembered that leaving had not been a punishment but a protection. She found Moira at dusk, thin and shivering, cigarette ash in a small puddle by her feet. Agatha's first instinct was to rage, to confront and claim apology and restitution. Yet when she approached, she saw not villainy but exhaustion. Moira's eyes had the same shape they always had: defensive, surprised, and often a little hollow. Moira's words were slurred with fatigue, and she claimed with a bitter chuckle that Agatha had left her to the world's kindness. There was a temptation to relish the justice of being the one who had survived better. Instead, Agatha did something that felt like both mercy and ceremony. She offered Moira a cup of tea and a sandwich. This was not a surrender. It was a test of the new moral ground Agatha had built. She could have walked away without a backward glance and kept her neat life. Instead, she chose to offer without demanding gratitude, to help without making her help a ledger entry. She learned that kindness can be an act of power, not weakness, that if it is genuine it frees both giver and receiver. Moira's reaction was messy. She accepted the sandwich, then pushed the cup away, then accepted it again. She asked for a cigarette, and Agatha refused. She asked for money, and Agatha gave a small amount but insisted on connecting Moira with the shelter and the cooperative's outreach program instead. The next morning, Moira vanished. Whether she accepted help later was a detail lost in the world's complicated ledger. The miracle here was not Moira's transformation but Agatha's steadiness. Her ability to act from a place of compassion without letting that compassion be a door back to self-harm. Not long after, a boy who had once bought one of Agatha's bags approached her with a crooked smile. He was starting a small cafe and wanted to sell her bags as part of a new, support local shelf. He paid a modest upfront fee and promised regular orders. The cafe became a soft beacon in a neighborhood that had been more about survival than aesthetic. People began to notice the bags in a setting that said, simply, "These are things worth owning." Agatha realized that triumph was not a single moment but the accumulation of choices. The choice to leave, to work, to accept help, to help back, and to protect one's dignity. The miracles continued. Invitations to speak at a nearby college, a letter from an old neighbor congratulating her on the honors she earned, a client who wanted to fund a small scholarship for girls to learn sewing. Each of these was small on its own, but together they shaped a life that had once been invisible into one with gravity. True triumph is made of choices. Help people without making yourself small. Compassion does not require you to sacrifice your dignity. Years passed with the subtle steadiness of good weather. The cooperative expanded into a brighter room, the grant built a training wing, and Agatha's name became attached to a line of bags known for careful stitching and honest stories. She hired a young woman, Talou, who reminded her of the wide-eyed determination she used to have. Talou was quick with hands and slow with trust. Agatha took her under wing as others had taken Agatha. Quietly, without spectacle. She taught Talou to thread needles, to place seams so that fabric held under heavy use, and to price work fairly. But more importantly, she taught her how to read the faces of customers and to refuse to be pushed into deals that would make her small. Agatha also started hosting informal evenings under the cooperative's window lights. Women who had passed through the squat and others who had only heard about the work came to sit and drink tea. They shared stories that were sometimes funny and sometimes heavy. When one woman spoke about the shame of being asked to return to a place that had hurt her, Agatha would quietly tell the story of the bench on the bridge, the blanket, the dog, and the stray vendor who had nudged her toward the shelter. Her story was not a sermon. It was a map. Miracles still arrived, sometimes like small packages, other times as vibrations that only a person paying attention could feel. An anonymous donation enabled the cooperative to pay for a year's worth of school fees for 3 girls. A local journalist wrote an article that showed up in an online paper, and orders from outside the city began to trickle in. But the most exquisite miracle was not money at all. It was seeing Talou teach a new apprentice and the way the room hummed like a living thing. One spring evening, as the women folded cloth and counted inventory, Moira walked into the cooperative. She was cleaner now and wore a cardigan that had seen better days. She did not ask for anything. She stood near the doorway and watched. Agatha walked over and offered her a seat. There were no grand apologies exchanged. Moira's eyes were small and careful. She said simply, "I heard you were here." Agatha nodded. It was a small, ordinary moment, and yet both women felt the magnitude of time passing and of survival. At the end of the evening, Agatha gathered the women and spoke about the unexpected ways life sometimes bends to help those who keep walking. She spoke about the people who had given her thread, money, and trust. She spoke about the dangerous comfort of old patterns and the courage it takes to choose differently. She did not offer answers so much as the wisdom of practice. Keep showing up, keep the hands honest, give without demanding repayment, and accept help without shame. The cooperative became more than a business. It became a living archive of second chances. Girls who had once squatted and wondered how to leave found, in the hum of machines, a path out. Agatha traveled to nearby towns to teach, not because she sought recognition, but because she believed that stories of small miracles should be told so they could multiply. Life's miracles are rarely lightning strikes. They're the slow collusion of steady hands, honest work, and people who choose to help without applause. The greatest lesson is this: Leave what harms you. Accept help when it comes. Work patiently. And when you can, be the miracle for someone else.